My name is Ethan Miller, and this story begins when I was just 11 years old, living in Ohio, USA. People say childhood is supposed to be warm, filled with love, laughter, scraped knees, and someone waiting at home with dinner on the table. Mine was nothing like that. I lived in a small, worn-out house at the edge of town. The roof leaked when it rained. We slept in jackets during winter because the heater always broke. But even with all that, I still believed home meant Mom, and as long as she was there, I was safe. Well, that belief shattered one cold morning in November. My mom, Lydia, was not like other moms. She wasn't the kind who baked cookies or asked how school was. She was beautiful, glamorous in her own way, tall, blonde hair always freshly dyed, lipstick like she was going to a party even at 8 a.m. She loved attention, loved compliments, loved anything shiny. But she didn't love responsibilities. My father? I never met him. Mom never talked about him, just said he wasn't worth remembering. That morning, she was rushing around the living room, dragging her big red suitcase across the wooden floor. Perfume filled the air, strong, expensive, the kind she never bought for me, but always for herself. I followed her like a lost puppy. "Mom, where are you going?" My voice was small, shaky. She looked annoyed that I even asked. "Ethan, you're 11, not a baby." I was a baby, compared to the world she was about to leave me in. She opened her wallet and pulled out a single $2 bill, smooth, crisp, as if untouched. "This should hold you over. Buy noodles or something." She placed it in my hand like she was doing me a favor. $2. That was all my mother thought my life was worth. My voice cracked. "Mom, what about food? School lunch? What if—" She raised her hand sharply. "Stop being dramatic. You'll manage. There's cereal, somewhere. Maybe ask neighbors if you need stuff." Ask neighbors? For food? Like a beggar? Before I could speak again, a taxi honked outside. She grabbed her suitcase, put on those big, shiny sunglasses, and walked to the door. Not one hug, not one kiss, not even a "take care," just a careless goodbye over her shoulder. "I'll be back before you know it." The door shut. I stood frozen with $2 between my fingers, feeling like the house got 10 times colder. The ticking wall clock grew louder. Silence echoed. That was the day I promised myself something I never forgot. One day I will never need her again, and one day she will regret leaving me. Hunger, cold nights, and humiliation. For the first 2 days, I lived on water and old cereal crumbs. By day 3, there was nothing left. I searched the house like a scavenger, drawers, cabinets, even under the couch, hoping to find a forgotten coin. Nothing. At school, my stomach growled so loud, kids laughed. One boy said I sounded like a dying bear. Everyone giggled. The teacher asked why I wasn't eating lunch. I lied, said I wasn't hungry. Truth was, I couldn't afford even a carton of milk. Nights were the worst. No lights. Electricity was cut off. I wrapped myself in blankets, shaking every time the wind rattled the window. I learned to survive by drinking tap water for dinner, eating ketchup packets from a gas station, collecting returnable cans for 5 cents each. Sometimes I cried quietly into my pillow so neighbors wouldn't hear. Help came from the last person I expected. One rainy night I was walking home with a plastic bag full of cans. My shoes were soaked, holes letting water in. I slipped on the sidewalk and the bag tore. Cans rolled everywhere. I sat there, broken, crying openly. I didn't care anymore. Then someone stopped. A man in a dark coat holding an umbrella. "You all right, kid?" It was Mr. Parker, our next-door neighbor, a quiet man in his 50s, widowed, always alone. People whispered claims that he was weird. Children avoided him. He knelt beside me, gathering cans without hesitation. "Where's your mom?" he asked softly. "Europe." He was shocked. "And she left you alone?" I nodded. rain mixed with my tears. He took a deep breath, handed the cans back, then said words I'll never forget. "You come to my house tonight. You need a warm meal." I hesitated. Mom always told me never to trust neighbors, ironic considering she was the one who abandoned me. But hunger overpowered fear. That night, he made me warm soup, chicken. Part 2. The Days of Hunger and Lessons in Survival. The first week of my mother's vacation was like being trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I had never felt so small, so powerless. I learned quickly that the world doesn't care when you're abandoned. Teachers asked why my homework wasn't done. Classmates whispered about my messy clothes, and the cafeteria smelled like laughter and hot pizza, while I nibbled at a single stale breadstick I managed to save from the trash. I wanted to cry in the middle of class, but fear of humiliation kept me silent. Instead, I counted every cent, calculated how many days my $2 could last, and found ways to scavenge what adults would throw away without thinking. Mr. Parker, the unexpected guardian. After the first night at Mr. Parker's, I realized I wasn't completely alone. He became my lifeline, a quiet, patient man who taught me things my mother never bothered to. He showed me how to budget food so it would last the week, cook simple meals with minimal ingredients, save coins by collecting recyclables, hide from bullies at school. Every small lesson planted seeds in me, seeds of self-reliance, cunning, and a slow burning determination that I would never be humiliated like this again. School, the world beyond the house. School became a battlefield. Kids mocked my worn-out shoes and patched jacket. Teachers noticed I was quieter, withdrawn, but they thought I was just shy. One day, during lunch, Jake Harrison, the richest kid in my class, spilled his juice on me and laughed as everyone else joined in. I stood there, soaked, stomach growling, cheeks burning with shame. Normally, I would have cried, but that day, I did something I had never done before. I didn't react. I swallowed my pride, wiped the juice from my jacket, and walked away silently. Inside me, a thought started to form. Someday, everyone who humiliated me will regret it. The $2 bill my mother left me, I carried it in my pocket like a badge of betrayal. Every time I touched it, I remembered the nights I went hungry, the cold floors I slept on, the laughter of classmates while I survived on scraps. It became more than money. It became proof that my mother didn't care, proof that I needed to rely only on myself, proof that revenge was not just possible, it was necessary. Learning the first lesson of revenge. Observation. I began observing my mother from afar, thanks to social media. Every post she shared about her glamorous life in Europe made my blood boil. Every picture she smiled in, every luxury item she flaunted, every exotic meal she enjoyed while I ate old cereal became a mental note. Paris Café, November 12. Venice Gondola Ride, November 14. Milan Shopping Spree, November 18. I memorized every location, every time, every detail. It became a map, not for a vacation, but for revenge. First taste of planning. By the second week, I had saved $15 from collecting cans and doing odd chores for neighbors. Instead of spending it on candy or small treats, I bought a notebook and a pen. I titled the first page, Plan, Payback. I was only 11, but I already understood one truth. People who abandon you in your most vulnerable moments never deserve forgiveness. They only deserve consequences. The notebook became my secret world. Every humiliation, every injustice, every betrayal was recorded. Every mental note about how I could use intelligence, patience, and timing to turn the tables was written down. By the end of that week, I had a list of things I would never forget, and a plan, vague now but growing clearer every day. A glimpse of true power, small victories. Ethan Miller at 11 started small, saved an extra 50 cents from soda bottles, bought a second warm meal, outsmarted the school bully who tried to steal my lunch, humiliatingly spilled his juice on him instead, helped Mr. Parker repair a leaky faucet, earned trust and respect. Every small lesson fed my confidence. Slowly, a transformation began. The scared, abandoned boy was starting to learn how to survive, how to manipulate, how to endure, and, most importantly, I stood at the window like a guard waiting for an enemy. Snowflakes fell slowly, dusting the rooftops, covering the cracked road outside. My breath fogged the cold glass. She was coming back today. Not because she missed me, not because she loved me, but because her vacation was over. I felt no excitement, no warmth, only a coldness inside, sharper than winter air. Mr. Parker knocked softly. "You'll be all right, Ethan?" I nodded, though neither of us fully believed it. He placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "Remember, strength isn't loud. Sometimes the strongest revenge is silence." I held those words tight. The taxi pulled in. Mid-afternoon, a taxi rolled up our cracked driveway. The car door opened. Mom stepped out, looking richer, prettier, glowing with luxury. Designer coat, new handbag, rolling luggage, hair perfectly styled. She looked like a woman who conquered Europe, not one who left an 11-year-old to starve. I stood at the door, my shirt too small, shoes worn, eyes darker than before. Her smile faded when she saw me. "You look terrible," she said, wrinkling her nose. No hug, no apology, just criticism. I didn't respond. Silence was my shield. She dragged her luggage inside, heels clicking like she owned the world. "Why is the house so cold? Why is there no electricity? What have you been doing here?" I blinked slowly. "You left me. You left me with nothing," but I didn't say it. I simply looked at her, expressionless. My silence annoyed her. "Ugh, you're being dramatic again. Anyway, I'm exhausted. Help me unpack." She walked past me like I was an invisible servant. Something inside me hardened. That moment marked the true beginning of revenge. Evidence in her suitcase. While unpacking, a small envelope fell from her coat. Inside were credit card bills, luxury receipts, hotel invoices. I saw numbers, big numbers. $1,200 dinner in Venice, $3,800 shopping in Milan, $2,500 spa in Paris, $7,200 total hotel bills. Money she could spend on herself freely. But her son? She left with only $2. That number burned in my chest like fire. She snatched the papers away. "Don't look at that." Her voice sharp, defensive. "Oh, and clean the living room later. I invited my friends tonight. We'll celebrate." Celebrate? Her luxury tour? While I starved? Something inside me smiled, not with happiness, but with cold planning. A celebration of lies. Evening came. 3 of her friends arrived, loud and proud, wrapped in fur coats. They brought wine, gifts, makeup, things adults flaunt when they want to look superior. They sat around with champagne glasses, laughing, gossiping, sharing selfies. My mother boasted like a queen. "Oh, Europe was divine. Italian men adore me. Paris fashion is incomparable. I felt so free there." One woman asked casually, "What about Ethan? Who watched him?" Mom waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, he managed. Kids don't need much." They laughed, like my pain was a joke. I stood in the corner quietly listening, not a single word of guilt from her. Instead, she smeared makeup, tried on earrings, and took mirror selfies with duck faces, posting online. Back home, feeling refreshed. Hashtag single mom life, hashtag no stress, hashtag blessed. I took a mental picture of that moment, her lies, her carelessness, her shallow pride. It would all be useful later. First move, psychological distance. That night, she told me, "From tomorrow, things will be normal again. I'll go to work, you'll go to school. Don't make trouble." Normal. What a funny word, because nothing was normal in me anymore. The scared child she abandoned had died. A new Ethan was born, quiet, observant, calculating. I replied softly, "Yes, Mom." She smiled, thinking she still controlled me, but inside I whispered a promise. I will rise. I will grow, and one day you will need me more than I ever needed you. That day, I won't be there. Seeds of revenge root deeper. That night, I wrote in my notebook, Phase 1, observe her weaknesses. Loves attention, obsessed with image, spends more than she earns, cares about social validation, avoids responsibility, has no savings. Weakness is where revenge grows, and she had many. Mr. Parker later told me in a low voice on his porch, "Revenge is like planting a tree. Plant deep roots first. Let it grow quietly. One day, its shadow will suffocate the one who wronged you." I nodded. The plan had just begun. I still said nothing to my mother. No anger, no confrontation, because silence scares abusers more than screams. A new chapter begins. Days passed. Mom returned to her routine, coffee, makeup, work, selfies, ignoring me unless she needed chores done. She lived like nothing happened, but I remembered everything. I was still hungry sometimes, still cold, still lonely, but each struggle built me sharper like steel forged in fire. When she slept, I stayed awake writing plans. When she partied, I studied quietly. When she laughed, I listened. Part 4. Growth in Silence. The months after my mother's return passed slowly, like a clock ticking in an empty room. She resumed her glamorous life, and I resumed my survival. But inside me, something had changed. The boy who once cried for $2 had vanished. In his place, a quiet, calculating presence emerged. Ethan Miller, the observer, the planner, the boy who learned the bitter lessons of betrayal. School and the shadow of shame. School was no longer just a place to learn subjects, it was my training ground. I watched how people manipulated others for attention. I observed teachers who played favorites. I noted which classmates were cruel and which were weak. I didn't retaliate anymore. I didn't show my hunger, my pain. I became invisible, blending in, listening, learning. Observation became my weapon. Every laugh, every insult, every careless word from those around me was data. And one day, that data would become a blueprint. Small skills, big plans. Mr. Parker became my mentor in subtle ways. He taught me practical lessons, how to manage money, how to negotiate with adults, how to hide emotions and appear confident. He also taught me psychological lessons. People who belittle you always fear one thing: intelligence. A quiet mind is more dangerous than a loud mouth. I remembered my mother's indifference, her careless words, her obsession with wealth and appearance. All of it became fuel. Teenage years, the transformation. By the time I was 15, I was no longer the skinny, shy boy who cried over $2. I had a part-time job at a local cafe, saving every cent. I learned basic investing from library books. I studied psychology, watching how adults lied, manipulated, and trusted appearances. I developed self-control, enduring ridicule and neglect without reacting. At home, my mother continued her oblivious life. She spent hours on social media, flaunting trips she had long since forgotten, dresses she couldn't afford, dinners she didn't cook. I noted everything: her habits, her weaknesses, her reliance on appearances. It was clear she had no idea who I was becoming, and that ignorance would be her downfall. A shocking discovery. One afternoon, while helping my mother clean the attic, I stumbled across an old box of letters and receipts. Among them, I found something that made my stomach twist. Hidden bills showing she had hidden debts, letters from banks threatening lawsuits, evidence she had lied to family and friends about her financial stability. She had not only abandoned me, but she was living a fragile, precarious life, always one mistake away from disaster. The thought struck me cold. Everything she flaunts, it's built on lies, and lies have a price. I smiled quietly, almost imperceptibly. Her vulnerability had been hiding in plain sight all along, and now I had the key to exploit it. First taste of control. At 16, I earned enough to start my first real savings, not for toys, not for clothes, for my plan. I bought a notebook different from the one I had at 11, a leather-bound one. This notebook contained every humiliation she caused me, every indulgent, careless spending she made, secrets I had uncovered, ideas on how to use her obsession with image and money against her. I called it the ledger. Every day I added to it. By the end of high school, the ledger grew thick, filled with every detail of my mother's weaknesses, her vanity, her lies, her debts, her social manipulations. It became my weapon of precision. Psychological warfare. The first moves. I didn't confront her directly, that would be reckless. Instead, I began subtle psychological games, deliberately ignored her attempts to control me, practiced speaking with calm authority even as a teenager, flashed knowledge she didn't know I had, planted small doubts in her social circle about her image without saying a word. Each tiny act left her slightly unsettled, though she didn't realize why. I was testing her reactions, learning what would make her uncomfortable, what would make her desperate for control. Part 5. The First Crack. By the time I turned 18, I was no longer dependent on my mother, not emotionally, not financially. I was preparing for the day she would realize she no longer had control over me. She didn't know it yet, but I was studying her the same way a hunter studies prey. And prey always walks with confidence before the trap snaps. The perfect occasion. One evening, Mom hosted another one of her bragging parties. The house was filled with lipstick, wine, and fake compliments. She wore a shimmering gold dress, laughing too loud, bragging too much. "Oh, Ethan is so lucky to have me. I work so hard to provide everything," she said to her guests. Provide? I nearly laughed. Not one of them knew the truth. Not one of them knew she left me starving at 11 with $2. Not one of them knew about her mounting debts and hidden bills. But tonight, I planned to expose just enough to plant doubt, without revealing my hand. Subtle sabotage. While she flaunted her Europe photos, I stood quietly behind the guests. When someone asked how the trip was funded, she lied confidently. "Oh, I saved for years." I stepped forward innocently and spoke softly, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mom, didn't you take out a credit loan for the trip? The one you said you'd pay later?" Silence. Glasses froze midway to lips. Her smile faltered for a split second. Barely noticeable to others, but to me it was everything. She forced a laugh. "Oh, honey, you misunderstood. Kids today don't know finances." But I watched her eyes. There was fear, small, flickering, but real. The foundation of her social image cracked just a little. The shift in power. Later that night, when the guests left, she slammed her door and screamed, "What do you think you're doing, embarrassing me like that?" Her voice, once so powerful to me, sounded weak. I looked at her calmly, without blinking. I just told the truth. She raised her hand like she might slap me, but she didn't, because I didn't flinch. Her hand fell slowly. She stepped back. That was the moment she realized something terrifying. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Fear had switched sides. A weapon called truth. After that night, she became more cautious, more defensive. She checked her purse twice, hid her mail, locked her room. She sensed something. She didn't know what, but she felt she was losing control. Good. Fear makes people sloppy. Sloppy people destroy themselves. I waited patiently. The internship. I landed an internship at a local law firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was powerful. I learned how debt cases work, how property and inheritance laws operate, how credit can collapse a person's status. Knowledge is power, and I was collecting it like ammunition. One evening after work, I returned home to find Mom crying on the couch, mascara running, wine glass shattered on the floor. A bank notice lay open beside her. Final warning, payment due, immediate action required. She saw me and panicked, wiping tears. I'm fine, just allergies. Lies. For the first time in my life, she needed something. Money, support, help. And I had all of them. But I wouldn't give freely like a son. I would give slowly, strategically. The offer. The next morning, I placed $500 on the table, money I earned myself. Her eyes widened. Where did you get this? Work, saving, planning. She stared at the money like a lifeline. I could use that, she whispered. I slid it away before she could touch it. You could, but things are different now. She looked confused, frustrated, vulnerable, all at once. What do you want? She asked. I smiled, calm, polite, deadly. Respect. She froze. And acknowledgement, I added. You will admit what you did when I was 11. She shook her head, denial kicking in like instinct. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, she did. She just didn't want to face it. I leaned closer. You left me with $2 when you flew to Europe. You abandoned me, and you will say it, out loud. Her face turned pale. For the first time in years, she had no power in Part 6, the final payback. The collapse. Months passed, and my mother's life began to crumble. Not because I actively destroyed her, but because her own lies and dependence met my calculated patience. She had spent recklessly in Europe, racked up debts she could barely manage, and now every social gathering, every Instagram post, every perfect life she tried to portray became a liability, and I, quietly, became her only support system. I reminded her which bills were due, I helped organize her accounts, I even offered to pay some of her smallest debts, on my terms. Her pride screamed at her, but she had no choice. She needed me. The father's secret. One evening, while helping organize old family files, I discovered a folder my mother had hidden in the attic. Inside were letters from my father, the man she had never spoken about. The truth hit me. My father had left not because he was a coward, but because my mother was reckless and manipulative. He had tried to protect me from her carelessness. She had painted herself as a single mom hero online, while the reality was she had almost destroyed us financially and emotionally. I realized something powerful. Her entire identity was a lie, and I now held the evidence. The confrontation. I waited until a quiet night. Mom, I said calmly, we need to talk. She looked wary. About what? I handed her the letters. Her eyes widened. You knew about him all along? She whispered. I shook my head. I didn't, but now I do, and I know the truth about everything you've hidden. Tears welled up, but it wasn't fear, it was panic. The woman who abandoned me, who flaunted wealth she didn't earn, who left an 11-year-old boy with $2, she finally realized she was powerless in my presence. I had no anger, I had control. Do you know what it feels like to survive on nothing, Mom? To be hungry, ignored, abandoned? I do. I remember every single detail. She flinched. "I am not your enemy anymore, but I will not forgive you easily, and I will not save you from the consequences of your actions if you don't change." She nodded slowly, a small shiver running down her spine. For once she understood. The child she abandoned had become her equal and more powerful. Rewriting the power dynamic. Over the next few months, I cemented my influence. She had to consult me for every financial decision. She had to acknowledge her mistakes openly, sometimes to neighbors, sometimes privately. I maintained distance, letting her realize that respect, love, or approval could no longer be demanded. It had to be earned. Every Instagram post she made was scrutinized, every trip she planned carefully considered, because she knew I had the knowledge and leverage to dismantle her facade in a moment. Karma served cold. Years later, she looked back at her life with regret. Friends drifted away after realizing her lies, banks tightened their reins, her lavish lifestyle was gone. I didn't need to shout, scream, or humiliate her